The emergency signal cut through space like a knife, its desperate cry echoing through the grand marble halls of the Galactic Council. Ambassador Veltar's purple tentacles shook as he worked to decode the incoming transmission, his 3 eyes focused intently on the flickering holographic display before him. The voice that emerged was broken, filled with terror and static. "Please, if anyone can hear this, the Varakari forces have smashed through our planetary shields. They're hunting us down like wild beasts in the forest. Our children are hiding in underground bunkers, but we don't know how long we can hold out. We're running out of food, out of hope. Please, somebody help us." Councilmember Thrix's scaled hands trembled as he pulled up the tactical reports from Kepler 44-B. The data made his stomach turn. Entire cities had been burned to nothing but ash and rubble. Massive agricultural domes that once fed millions now lay twisted and smoking. The death count kept climbing, 3 million confirmed dead, another 7 million missing and presumed killed. "This is a massacre," Thrix whispered, his voice barely audible in the vast chamber. "The Vagari aren't just conquering, they're trying to wipe out every living thing on that planet." The Zephyrians had always been peaceful farmers and scientists. Their world was known throughout the galaxy for its beautiful gardens and advanced agricultural research. They had no military, no weapons of war. They grew food and studied plants while trusting the Galactic Council to keep them safe from hostile forces. "Ambassador." Veltar looked around the council chamber desperately. "What military forces can we send immediately? Time is running out for those people." The silence that followed was deafening. One by one, the representatives of different alien species shook their heads or looked away. The Altarian battle fleet was fighting pirates on the other side of the galaxy and couldn't reach Kepler 4 for at least 6 months. The Centauri Defense Corps was already spread too thin, trying to protect trade routes from raiders and smugglers. Every other species that had any kind of military was either too far away to help in time, or their soldiers were too weak and fragile to fight against the brutal Vakari war machine. The Vakari were known as some of the most vicious warriors in the galaxy. They lived for battle and showed no mercy to anyone who stood in their way. "There might be one possibility," came a quiet voice from the back of the chamber. "Archivist." Nyx stepped forward, her pale blue skin almost glowing in the dim light. Her hands clutched an ancient datapad, and her voice shook slightly as she spoke. "I've been researching our classified archives, looking for any military force we haven't considered yet." She paused, looking nervous about what she was about to suggest. "There's a planet in the archives marked as a Class 12 death world. It's called Earth." The council members looked at each other with growing unease. Everyone knew what a rating meant. It was a world so deadly and dangerous that most galactic species couldn't even survive there for more than a few minutes. The fact that intelligent life had somehow evolved on such a planet was almost unbelievable. "Are you seriously suggesting we ask for help from Deathworlders?" Veltar asked, his tentacles writhing with anxiety. That could be even more dangerous than the Vakari invasion itself. But, as another desperate transmission crackled through, from Kepler 42b, reporting that 2 more cities had fallen to the invaders, the council realized they were out of options. Sometimes you had to fight monsters with monsters, deep within the most secure section of the Galactic Council's archives. Archivist Nyx's fingers moved across the ancient control panel. The restricted files required 3 different security clearances just to access, and for good reason. These were the records of worlds so dangerous that most species preferred to pretend they didn't exist. The holographic display flickered to life, showing a beautiful blue and green planet spinning slowly in the darkness of space. White clouds swirled across its surface, and vast oceans reflected light from its yellow star. To most observers, it would look like paradise, exactly the kind of world that peaceful species dreamed of colonizing. "Don't let the appearance fool you," Nyx said grimly, as the assembled council members leaned forward to get a better look. "This is Earth, and it's classified as a Class 12 death world. She began reading from the official report, her voice growing, more shocked with each detail. Gravity is 30% stronger than what we consider normal throughout the galaxy. That means every step these creatures take requires more strength than most of our warriors can generate. Council member Thrix shifted uncomfortably in his chair. His own homeworld had gravity only half of galactic standard, and even that sometimes left him feeling exhausted after a long day. The atmosphere contains 21% oxygen, Nyx continued, which our scientists classify as a highly reactive and dangerous gas. Most species can only breathe pure oxygen for a few minutes before it becomes toxic. These humans live in it every day of their lives. Ambassador Veltar's tentacles began writhing with anxiety. What about their weather systems? Absolutely terrifying, Nyx replied, pulling up weather data. Their storms can generate winds that move faster than our fastest spacecraft. They call these hurricanes and tornadoes, and somehow people just ... live through them. Some even chase them for fun. The hologram shifted to show massive volcanic eruptions spewing molten rock hundreds of meters into the air. The planet's surface is constantly shifting and changing. Earthquakes that would destroy our cities happen regularly. Volcanoes explode without warning, covering entire regions in deadly ash and lava. But surely no intelligent life could survive in such conditions, whispered Council Member Thrix, his scales now completely pale with fear. Nyx scrolled to the biological data, and her expression grew even more serious. Not only did intelligent life evolve there, it dominated the entire planet. The species calls itself human, and their physical capabilities are beyond anything we've ever encountered. She highlighted the anatomical charts. They have backup systems for almost everything. Extra kidneys, redundant blood vessels, bones that are incredibly dense and strong. But the most terrifying thing is something they call an adrenaline response. What does that mean? Veltar asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. When humans face danger or stress, their bodies automatically become faster, stronger, and more resistant to pain. They literally become more dangerous when threatened. It's like they're designed for survival under the worst possible conditions. At that moment, another desperate transmission arrived from Kepler-44 to B. 3 more cities had fallen to the Valkyrie advance, and the death toll was rapidly approaching 10 million innocent civilians. Nyx looked at the terrified faces around her, and spoke the words that would change galactic history forever. I know contacting these humans seems insane, but we're out of time and out of options. If anyone in the universe can stop the Valkyrie, it's the species that turned the ultimate death world into their home. The message arrived at Earth's interstellar defense headquarters in Geneva at exactly 0347 hours, cutting through the quiet night shift like a lightning bolt. The automated translation systems worked overtime to convert the alien languages into something humans could understand. But the desperation in the transmission needed no translation. Director Park had been awakened from her sleep and rushed to the command center, her coffee still steaming as she read through the message for the second time. Her experienced eyes took in every detail: millions of civilians under attack, an entire peaceful civilization being wiped out by some alien war machine called the Valkyrie. Get me all senior officers in the main briefing room, now, she ordered, her voice cutting through the early morning stillness. Within minutes, the room was filled with Earth's top military minds, all wondering what could be urgent enough to wake them in the middle of the night. Ladies and gentlemen, we've just received humanity's first official request for military intervention from the Galactic Council. Director Park announced, watching a surprised look spread across the faces around the conference table. A hostile, alien species is conducting what appears to be a genocide against peaceful farmers and scientists on a world called Kepler-44 to B. Colonel Kim leaned forward, his tactical mind already working. What kind of enemy are we looking at? Standard peacekeeping mission with our regular forces. Park shook her head grimly as she pulled up the intelligence reports on the main screen. This is far from standard, Colonel. The Vakari are described as one of the most brutal warrior races in the galaxy. They don't just conquer territories. They completely eliminate all life on the planets they attack. The room fell silent as the officers absorbed this information. Captain Lee studied the environmental data streaming across his tablet. Director, these atmospheric readings from the target world. Some of these zones would be considered toxic waste dumps by most species standards. Exactly, Park replied, her decision already made. This isn't a job for regular military units. The enemy is too dangerous, and the environment too hostile for conventional forces. She paused, making eye contact with each officer. We're deploying the Hellwalker Battalion. A low whistle came from Captain Lee, and several other officers exchanged knowing looks. Everyone in that room had heard stories about the Hellwalkers, but most had never seen them in action. They weren't your typical soldiers. They were recruited from the most extreme edges of human survival. These were people who dove to the deepest parts of Earth's oceans, where the pressure would crush submarines. Scientists who worked inside active volcanoes, walking on lava flows that could melt steel. Arctic researchers who lived for months in temperatures that would kill most humans in minutes. Desert specialists who could survive weeks in places where water was just a memory. Director, are you absolutely certain about this? Captain Lee asked carefully. The Hellwalkers will be humanity's first impression on the galactic stage. Once we unleash them, there's no going back. Park looked at the casualty reports still flooding in from the distant world. Another update showed 2 more cities had fallen in just the past hour. Somewhere out there, alien children were hiding in bomb shelters, listening to their parents cry as their world burned around them. The Galactic Council asked Earth for help, she said firmly. They specifically called us because they needed someone who could survive impossible conditions and fight impossible odds. Well, they're about to discover exactly what that means. Within 3 hours, Sergeant Major Han was standing in the briefing room of Earth's fastest transport ship, looking at 43 of the most dangerous humans ever assembled. These weren't just soldiers, they were survivors who had turned Earth's deadliest environments into their playground. The sleek human transport ship materialized out of hyperspace, like a ghost, its dark hull reflecting the distant stars as it approached the Zephyrian system. Several Galactic Council vessels hung back at what they considered a safe distance. Their crews pressed against viewports to catch their first glimpse of the legendary Deathworlders. Ambassador Veltar's 3 eyes were glued to his observation screen, watching the approaching shuttle with a mixture of curiosity and terror. His tentacles twitched nervously as he spoke to his aide. I expected them to be larger, more intimidating. They look almost ordinary. The council chamber aboard the flagship had been specially prepared for this historic first contact. Air scrubbers worked overtime to create an atmosphere that wouldn't immediately kill the visiting humans, though the mixture was still far from ideal. Temperature controls had been adjusted to what the computers calculated might be survivable for creatures from such an extreme world. The airlock hissed open with a sound that made every alien in the room flinch. Sergeant Major Han stepped through, first, moving with a fluid confidence that immediately set everyone on edge. He was followed by his advance team, just 5 humans, but their presence filled the entire chamber. The Zephyrians, who had been waiting to greet their rescuers, immediately stumbled backward. Their highly developed sense of smell, evolved to detect the ripeness of crops and the approach of seasonal changes, was now screaming warnings at them. These creatures smelled like death, like hunting, like things that killed other things too. Survive. Sergeant Major Han, Earth Defense Corps, he announced simply, his voice carrying a tone that made every translation device in the room struggle to find appropriate words. There was something in that voice, a confidence born from surviving things that would have ended most species before they even began. Dr. Yun, who served as the team's specialist in alien biology and environments, immediately pulled out her scanner and began taking readings of the chamber around them. Her frown deepened as the numbers appeared on her display. "The oxygen level in here is only 12%, she reported to Han. "That's less than what we'd find on top of Mount Everest." She continued reading the environmental data. "Temperature is running about 15 degrees below what we'd consider comfortable for long-term operations. The atmospheric pressure is roughly equivalent to being at high altitude." Captain Cho, who had spent years working in Earth's most extreme environments, looked around the chamber with mild interest. "Honestly, this feels like a pleasant spring morning in Seoul," he commented casually. "Maybe a little thin on the oxygen, but nothing we can't handle." Ambassador Veltar's translator completely malfunctioned trying to process this response. These creatures were describing conditions that would kill most galactic species within hours, and they were talking about it like discussing the weather over breakfast. Trying to regain his composure and warn them of the dangers ahead, Veltar stepped forward. "You must understand, the Vakari forces are unlike anything you've encountered. They're heavily armed with the most advanced weapons in the galaxy. They've destroyed everything in their path, showing no mercy to anyone." Han turned to exchange a quick glance with Lieutenant Park, who had been studying the tactical data streaming in from the planet's surface. The look that passed between them spoke of shared experiences that most beings couldn't even imagine. "How many enemy troops are we looking at?" Han asked, his tone still perfectly calm. "Our intelligence estimates approximately 50,000 Vakari warriors," Veltar replied, his voice shaking slightly. "They also have orbital bombardment platforms and advanced air support vehicles." Han was quiet for a moment, processing this information. Then he looked back at the ambassador with what might have been confusion. "That's all?" He asked the question, hung in the air like a challenge, and every alien in the room suddenly realized they might have made a terrible mistake in calling for help from Earth. The question, "That's all," echoed through the council chamber like a gunshot, leaving every alien present in stunned silence. Ambassador Veltar's tentacles stopped writhing entirely, frozen in disbelief at the casual way this human had just dismissed an army that had terrorized half the galaxy. Within hours of that meeting, the real shock began, as Kepler-4 for 2b's twin sun set and the planet entered its 12-hour night cycle. The Hellwalker teams scattered across the world's surface like ghosts. What the Galactic Council had planned as careful reconnaissance missions quickly turned into something that made their alien observers question everything they thought they knew about warfare. Corporal Kim was moving through the bleeding marshlands, a toxic swamp that had completely stopped the Zephyrian evacuation efforts weeks ago. The water here wasn't just dirty, it was literally acidic enough to eat through most metals. The air was filled with poisonous gases that had killed entire Vakari scouting parties who made the mistake of flying too low. But Kim walked through it like he was taking a pleasant evening stroll through a park. His breathing equipment worked perfectly in the deadly atmosphere, and his specially designed boots didn't even seem bothered by the acid eating at everything else. Through his thermal imaging scope, he watched Vakari patrol ships carefully, flying high above the marshland, too scared to come closer. "These guys are amateurs," he muttered into his communicator. "They're treating this swamp like it's some kind of obstacle instead of using it for cover." Meanwhile, Private Yu was doing something that the Galactic Council's top scientists had declared completely impossible. She was swimming in the planet's eastern ocean, conducting underwater surveillance that should have killed her within minutes. The ocean wasn't just salty, it was so acidic that it could dissolve bone. The pressure at the depths she was exploring would have crushed most spacecraft. Yet there she was, moving silently beneath Vakari naval vessels, taking detailed photographs of their hull designs and weapon systems. Her specially designed diving suit made her practically invisible to their sensors, and her human ability to hold her breath for extended periods meant she could stay submerged far longer than any enemy. would expect. Their underwater defenses are a joke, she reported through her waterproof communicator. They've got exactly 3 depth charges covering this entire coastline. I could sink half their fleet before they even knew I was here. The reports kept coming in from locations that should have been completely uninhabitable. Corporal Kim checked in from inside the radiation zone surrounding the planet's damaged nuclear facility, an area so contaminated that Vakari forces had written it off as a dead zone. His radiation suit was working perfectly, and he was getting detailed intelligence on enemy supply routes that passed nearby. They're not even posting guards here, he laughed. They think nothing can survive in this radiation, so they're using it as a highway for their supply convoys. But perhaps the most shocking report came from Sergeant Major Han himself. The Galactic Council observers nearly fainted when they realized he had positioned himself on top of an active volcanic ridge that was currently erupting. Lava flows that could melt starship hulls were passing just meters from his position, and he was using the heat signature to mask his own thermal readings. Varakari defensive positions are completely predictable, Han reported calmly, as if he wasn't standing next to liquid rock. They're so afraid of environmental hazards that they're actually making themselves weaker by avoiding them. Specialist. Hong added her own observations from inside a chemical processing plant that had been leaking toxic fumes for months. They fight like frightened animals, she noted. All brute force and overwhelming numbers. When they take casualties, they panic and retreat instead of adapting. Lieutenant Park coordinated all the incoming intelligence from the orbiting command ship, shaking her head in amazement. It's like they've never faced an enemy that could think creatively or use the environment as a weapon. They don't understand psychological warfare or guerrilla tactics. Han's voice came through the communications one final time that night, and there was something in his tone that made even his own team members grin with anticipation. Well then, it looks like it's time to give them a proper education in human-style warfare. As darkness fell across Kepler-4 for to be, the human teams vanished into the night like shadows. The planet's twin moons cast an eerie glow over landscapes that had become graveyards for both Zephyrian civilians and Vakari soldiers. What should have been simple scouting missions quickly turned into something that left the watching Galactic Council observers speechless with horror and amazement. In the southern continent, Corporal Kim was making his way through what the locals called the bleeding marshlands. This wasn't just any swamp. The water here was so toxic it could eat through steel plating in minutes. The air was thick with poisonous gases that had killed entire Zephyrian evacuation teams when they tried to cross weeks earlier. Even the mighty Vakari had learned to avoid this death trap completely. But Kim walked through it like he was strolling through his neighborhood back on Earth. His breathing equipment filtered the deadly air effortlessly, and his boots seemed completely unaffected by the acid that was slowly dissolving fallen tree branches around him. Through his thermal scope, he watched Vakari patrol ships flying high overhead, too terrified to come anywhere near the surface. "Command, this is Kim," he whispered into his radio. "These Vakari are treating environmental hazards like walls instead of doors. They've got 0 patrols in the marshland because they think nothing can survive here. I can see their entire southern supply line from my position." Meanwhile, hundreds of kilometers away, Private Yu was accomplishing something that every scientist in the galaxy had declared impossible. She was swimming through the planet's acidic eastern ocean, moving silently beneath the surface like some kind of sea monster. The water was so corrosive that it had dissolved 3 different types of Vakari submarines that had tried to patrol these waters. Yu's specialized diving gear kept her safe while she photographed the undersides of enemy warships. Her human lung capacity allowed her to stay underwater for nearly 10 minutes at a time, far longer than any alien species could manage. The Vakari had no idea that death was swimming directly beneath their feet. "Their naval defenses are pathetic," she reported, during a brief surface break. They've got maybe 5 depth charges, protecting this entire coastline. I could plant explosives on half their fleet before they even knew what hit them. But perhaps the most incredible position belonged to Specialist Hong, who had somehow set up a listening post inside the radiation zone around a damaged nuclear facility. This area was so contaminated that Vakari reconnaissance drones shut down just from flying over it. Their computers had marked it as a complete dead zone, where nothing could possibly survive. Hong sat comfortably in her radiation suit, intercepting enemy communications and watching supply convoys use the area as a highway. They're so scared of a little radiation that they're not even posting guards, she laughed. It's like having a front row seat to all their secret plans. The most shocking report came from Sergeant Major Han himself. The Galactic Council's sensors showed him positioned directly on an active volcanic ridge, where lava flows hot enough to melt starship armor were passing just meters from his location. The heat should have killed him instantly, but instead, he was using it to hide his own thermal signature from enemy scanners. Vakari defensive positions follow the same pattern everywhere, Han reported calmly, as if he wasn't sitting next to liquid rock that could vaporize most known metals. They're so afraid of environmental dangers that they're actually making themselves weaker. They're leaving huge gaps in their coverage because they won't go anywhere that looks scary. Lieutenant Park coordinated all the intelligence from orbit, her mind racing as she analyzed the patterns emerging from the field reports. It's becoming clear that these Vakari have never fought an enemy that could adapt and use hostile environments as advantages. She concluded, they're used to fighting other species that are just as fragile as they are. Han's final transmission that night carried a tone that made even his hardened teammates smile with anticipation. Well, looks like we're going to teach them what happens when you pick a fight with a species that considers hostile environments to be home sweet home. The morning started like any other for Commander Vroktal and his 3rd Battalion. They were conducting their standard patrol sweep through the northern continent, following the same routes they had used for weeks without incident. The Vakari military machine was efficient and predictable. They cleared sectors methodically, destroyed any resistance they encountered, and moved on to the next target. But this morning would be different. This morning, the hunters would become the hunted. Commander Vroktal was sitting in his command vehicle, reviewing the boring routine reports from his various units, when something strange happened. His communications officer, Sergeant Krell, simply stopped talking mid-sentence. The radio went quiet in a way that made Rakelto's spine tingle with unease. Krell, report your status. The commander barked into his communicator. Nothing but static, answered him back. Within minutes, another communications officer went silent, then another, and another. Each time, the radio would just cut to dead silence in the middle of a routine check-in, as if the soldiers had simply vanished from existence. What in the name of the ancestors is happening out there? Vroktal demanded, his voice rising with panic. All units, report your positions immediately. The response that came back was fragmented and filled with terror. Unknown contacts, sir. They're not showing up on any of our thermal scanners. Somehow moving through the poison gas zones that we marked as death traps. How are they even breathing in there? ... The transmission dissolved into static and screams before cutting off entirely. Over the next 3 days and nights, reports began flooding in from Vakari units across the planet, and each one sounded more impossible than the last. Enemies were somehow appearing from environments that no rational creature would even attempt to enter. Attacks were coming from underwater positions in seas so acidic that they dissolved metal. Explosions were being triggered by devices that had been planted in radiation. Zones where even their most advanced protective suits would fail within minutes. Corporal Min had turned himself into a living nightmare for the Vakari supply chain. He had spent 2 full days buried under volcanic ash near Mount Kethra, a location so hostile that even the Vakari's toughest scouts refused to patrol there. The ash was hot enough to cook flesh, and the air was filled with sulfur compounds that would have killed most species in seconds. But Min lay there patiently, like a predator waiting for prey, monitoring the Vakari supply convoys that used the nearby road because they thought nothing could threaten them from such a deadly location. When he finally struck, planting explosives on a massive ammunition depot, the destruction was so complete that Vakari Command initially attributed it to natural seismic activity. It wasn't until they found pieces of obviously human-made charges in the wreckage that they realized they were facing an enemy unlike anything they had ever encountered. Private Sue had turned psychological warfare into an art form. When a Vakari patrol unit tried to retreat from her position, she followed them for 18 straight hours across terrain that should have killed her at least 3 different ways. She tracked them through boiling hot springs that melted their equipment, across frozen wasteland that dropped to temperatures far below anything most life could survive, and finally through a chemical bog that burned their skin even through their protective suits. But Sue kept coming, hour after hour, always just visible in the distance, never getting closer, but never falling behind. The Vakari soldiers began panicking, shooting at shadows, abandoning equipment to move faster, and finally breaking ranks entirely when they realized this relentless human hunter would never stop pursuing them. The psychological impact was devastating. Word spread through the Vakari forces like wildfire, carried by the few survivors who managed to escape these impossible encounters. "They're not natural," whispered one terrified Vakari soldier who had somehow survived an underwater attack. "They appear from places where nothing should be able to live. They hunt like vengeful spirits, and survive like the gods themselves sent them to punish us." Another survivor, his eyes wide with trauma, could only repeat the same phrase over and over. "They're ghosts. They're hunting ghosts that refuse to die." Commander Vragtel stared at these reports in disbelief, but the evidence was undeniable. His mighty 3rd Battalion was being systematically destroyed by an enemy that seemed to thrive in conditions that would instantly kill his own troops. For the first time in his military career, the hunter had become the prey. The losses were becoming impossible to ignore. Vakari Supreme Command watched their casualty reports climb higher each day, with entire units simply vanishing without explanation. Their most experienced warriors were being picked off by an enemy that seemed to materialize from thin air, strike with deadly precision, and then disappear back into environments that should have been completely uninhabitable. High Admiral Vekmer slammed his fist on the tactical display in frustration. "Enough of this madness. If these surface demons want to hide in their poison swamps and radiation zones, then we'll burn everything from orbit until nothing remains alive on that cursed planet." The order went out across the Vakari fleet: deploy the orbital bombardment platforms. 12 massive heavy cruisers moved into position around Kepler-4 for 2B, each one carrying enough firepower to turn continents into glass. If they couldn't fight these mysterious enemies on the ground, they would simply eliminate the ground itself. Back on the planet's surface, Sergeant Major Han received the intelligence update while crouched inside a cave system that most species would consider a death trap. The air was thick with toxic gases, and the temperature was hot enough to cook most aliens alive, but Han looked perfectly comfortable as he reviewed the incoming data. "They're bringing in orbital platforms?" he asked with the same tone someone might use to discuss the weather. Lieutenant Park's voice crackled through the radio from the orbiting human command ship. "Confirmed. 12 heavy cruisers, moving into bombardment formation. They're planning to systematically destroy the planet's surface until there's nowhere left for us to hide." What happened next would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for generations to come, while any other species would have immediately requested evacuation or begun surrender negotiations. The humans did something that defied all logic and military doctrine. They escalated. Captain Sessa had spent most of his civilian life as a deep-sea mining engineer, working in underwater environments that would have crushed most starships. Now, he put those skills to deadly use, leading a team through the planet's underground river system that ran directly beneath the main Vakari command center. The rivers were filled with acid that could eat through metal, and the pressure would have killed most beings instantly. But TSA and his team swam through them like they were taking a refreshing dip in a swimming pool. They emerged directly inside the enemy command bunker through a drainage system that the Vakari had never bothered to guard, because they assumed nothing could survive the journey through those deadly waters. The assault was swift and brutal, eliminating the entire orbital targeting coordination center before the enemy even knew they were under attack. Specialist Zhang had an even more dramatic approach to the problem. Her previous job involved maintaining mining equipment inside active volcanoes on Earth. So when she discovered that the main Vakari ammunition depot was built near a lava tube system, she knew exactly what to do. She spent 6 hours crawling through molten rock passages that would have instantly vaporized any other life form, finally emerging directly inside the heavily guarded facility. The explosion that followed when she detonated the ammunition stockpile was so massive it could be seen from orbit, creating a mushroom cloud that rose high into the planet's atmosphere. But it was Private Na who accomplished something that would be considered impossible by every military strategist in the galaxy. Using survival techniques she had learned during Arctic expeditions on Earth, she somehow managed to approach the Vakari flagship by drifting through the vacuum of space for 14 straight hours. She had positioned herself among the debris field from earlier battles, using her specialized environment suit to regulate her body temperature and oxygen consumption in ways that seemed to defy the laws of physics. To the Vakari sensors, she appeared to be just another piece of floating wreckage, until she was close enough to attach magnetic explosives directly to their hull. The Vakari, who had spent centuries considering themselves the most advanced and dangerous warriors in the galaxy, watched in stunned disbelief as their technological advantages simply dissolved before human creativity and their absolutely terrifying refusal to accept defeat under any circumstances. High Admiral Vekmer stared at the tactical display showing his flagship with a massive hole blown in its side, his orbital bombardment coordination center destroyed, and his main ammunition depot turned into a crater visible from space, all accomplished by a species that treated impossible conditions like minor inconveniences. For the first time in Vakari military history, their supreme commander was beginning to understand what it meant to face an enemy that had evolved from the ultimate predators on the ultimate death world, the moment that would forever change. Vakari military doctrine began at sunset on the third day of what their historians would remember as the Night of Burning Ice. Supreme Commander Dekvar had made what he believed was a brilliant, strategic decision, pulling his remaining forces back to the Crystal Plateau, a position that should have been completely unassailable. The plateau itself was a natural fortress, rising nearly a kilometer above the surrounding landscape and accessible only through a handful of narrow passes. But what made it truly impregnable was its location in the heart of the frozen methane fields, where temperatures dropped to levels that would kill most known life forms within seconds of exposure. "Let these surface demons try to reach us here," Bekvar had declared confidently to his officers. "Even if they somehow survive the climb, the cold will turn them into frozen corpses before they can take 3 steps. He had positioned his best remaining troops, nearly 8,000 elite Vakari warriors, in defensive positions across the plateau. Their sensors covered every possible approach route, and their weapons were trained on the killing fields below. It was a perfect defensive position that no rational enemy would even attempt to assault. But Dekvar had made one critical mistake in his planning. He was dealing with humans who considered Antarctica a pleasant vacation destination. As the planet's twin moons rose in the sky, something impossible began happening in the frozen wasteland below. The entire Hellwalker battalion was moving across the methane fields like ghosts. Their specialized cold weather gear, allowing them to operate comfortably in temperatures that would have instantly frozen the blood of most galactic species. Sergeant Lee had spent years working in Earth's polar regions, so the deadly cold felt almost warm to him. He moved through the ice formations with practiced ease, planting explosive charges in the methane deposits with the precision of a master craftsman. When detonated in sequence, these charges didn't just create explosions, they created a carefully orchestrated maze of fire and ice that would channel the enemy's movements exactly where the humans wanted them. Meanwhile, Corporal Beak was demonstrating why humans had earned their reputation as the galaxy's most terrifying persistence hunters. She had been crawling through ice caves and frozen crevasses for 6 straight hours, moving through passages so narrow and cold that even the Vakari's most advanced reconnaissance drones had shut down trying to navigate them when she finally emerged behind enemy lines. Having traveled through what the Vakari considered completely impassable terrain, she was positioned perfectly to begin dismantling their communication networks from within. But it was Private Kong who delivered the psychological blow that would break the Vakari spirit entirely. While her teammates created chaos and confusion throughout the enemy position, she had begun a different kind of warfare, one that struck at the very heart of Vakari courage. Moving with the silent precision of a natural predator, she spent the entire night hunting down Vakari sentries one by one, but she wasn't using weapons or explosives. Instead, she was eliminating them with her bare hands, using techniques that required nothing more than human strength and the kind of close combat skills that every species on a death world learned for survival. More terrifying than the killings themselves was what she did afterward. Each body was carefully positioned as a message, left where the morning patrol would find them in arrangements that told a clear story. Your guards cannot protect you. Your positions are not safe, and death can come for you anywhere, anytime. As dawn broke across the crystal plateau, painting the ice fields in brilliant shades of orange and gold, the Vakari forces discovered the full extent of their nightmare. Their impregnable fortress had been completely penetrated by an enemy that treated lethal cold like a minor inconvenience. Supreme Commander Dekvar stood in his command center, staring at tactical displays that showed his 8,000 elite warriors scattered and demoralized by just 43 humans. His communication systems were down, his defensive positions were compromised, and his own soldiers were beginning to panic at the realization that nowhere was safe from these relentless hunters. That's when Han's voice crackled through on an open communication channel, reaching every Vakari ship in the system. "Attention Vakari fleet," came the calm, almost conversational tone that had become the stuff of nightmares for enemy forces. "You have exactly 20 minutes to begin withdrawal from this system and return to your own territory. After that deadline passes, we're going to stop being polite and start getting serious about this whole warfare thing." Supreme Commander that looked once more at his tactical display, showing his supposedly impregnable position, completely overrun by creatures who had turned his greatest natural defenses into minor obstacles. For the first time in his military career, he understood what it meant to face an enemy that had evolved from the most dangerous predators on the most hostile world in the galaxy. "Signaled the fleet," he ordered, his voice heavy with defeat. "Full withdrawal, immediate departure." And so the great Vakari war machine, terror of a dozen star systems, fled in complete retreat before 43 humans, who had simply refused to acknowledge that certain things were supposed to be impossible. 3 standard galactic months had passed since the last Vakari ship fled from Kepler 44 to B, and the ripple effects were still spreading across the galaxy like waves from a dropped stone. Ambassador Veltar stood nervously in the great marble chamber of the Galactic Council, preparing to deliver what would become one of the most important reports in interstellar history. His tentacles still trembled slightly as he spoke, the memories of those 17 terrifying days still fresh in his mind. "Honored Council members, I present the official report on what we are calling the Zephyrian Liberation. The human forces, accomplished in just 17 planetary rotations what our combined galactic fleets could not achieve in multiple cycles of warfare. He paused, looking around at the assembled representatives from dozens of different worlds. The results speak for themselves. Total Vakari withdrawal from 7 star systems. Complete restoration of Zephyrian territorial integrity. Rescue of over 8 million civilian refugees who had been hiding in underground shelters. The numbers on the holographic display told an even more incredible story. Vakari military losses were staggering. Over 40,000 casualties, hundreds of destroyed vehicles, and the complete abandonment of military equipment worth more than most planetary economies. But the number that made every alien in the chamber fall silent was the final statistic. 0 human casualties. Council member Thrix leaned forward, his scales pale with disbelief. Ambassador, we need to understand what we're dealing with here. These humans, what exactly are they? Before Veltar could even attempt an answer, the council chamber's communication array suddenly activated with an urgent priority signal. But instead of an emergency distress call, something unprecedented was happening. Requests were flooding in from across the known galaxy. The peaceful Andrari system, known throughout the stars for their beautiful art and philosophy, was formally requesting human military protection from the pirate fleets that had been raiding their trade routes for decades. The mining colonies of Zarian wanted to hire human security consultants to protect their operations from corporate raiders. 3 different species were asking Earth to serve as neutral mediators in their territorial disputes. Having heard that humans were both fair and absolutely terrifying to fight against. But the message that truly showed how completely the galactic balance of power had shifted came from an unexpected source. The hegemony of Carthel had been one of the galaxy's most aggressive expansionist empires for over 2 centuries, conquering weaker species and absorbing their territories through brutal military campaigns. Their message was remarkably brief and formal. The sovereign territories of Carthel have no quarrel whatsoever with the human Deathworld alliance. We seek only peaceful coexistence and mutually beneficial trade relationships. The chamber fell completely silent as the implications sank in. The Carthel hegemony, which had never backed down from any fight in their entire history, was essentially surrendering before the war even started. Director Park's holographic image appeared in the center of the chamber, her calm smile somehow more intimidating than any weapon display. She looked completely relaxed as she addressed the assembled representatives of dozens of worlds, as if discussing interstellar warfare was just another day at the office. The Hellwalker Battalion has returned to Earth for standard post-mission debriefing and rest rotation, she announced casually. According to their mission reports, they found Kepler-4 for 2B's environmental conditions quite pleasant. Several team members compared it to a relaxing camping trip in one of our national parks. She let that statement hang in the air for a moment, watching as alien faces went pale with the realization that humans considered a planet lethal to most life forms to be a vacation destination. Earth looks forward to continued cooperation and partnership with the Galactic Council. Director Park continued. We believe this is the beginning of a new era of peace and stability throughout the galaxy. As the council's session officially adjourned and representatives began filing out of the chamber, one truth had become crystal clear to every intelligence agency, military command, and political leader across the stars. Earth had fundamentally changed the rules of interstellar relations. Humanity, the species that had learned to thrive on a world so hostile that it was classified as uninhabitable by galactic standards, was now active among the stars. They had proven that they could appear anywhere, survive anything, and defeat enemies that had terrorized entire sectors of space. Word spread quickly through diplomatic channels, military networks, and trade routes. There was a new player in galactic politics, and they came from a world where survival itself was an art form. Most importantly for the future of interstellar peace, Earth was officially taking requests for assistance. The age of human influence in the galaxy had begun, and it would never be the same again.